the idea that politics would play a role in big cases like this, it's absolutely ludicrous, and it's totally contrary to my experience as a prosecutor.
Yep, you recognize him. Former special counsel Jack Smith, standing by the 2 federal indictments he brought against President Trump that were ultimately dismissed. Smith was responding to the constant attacks from Republicans who accuse him of playing politics and weaponizing justice. Instead, arguing that's actually what the administration is doing right now.
Señores, oficialmente está de vuelta. Y no se guardó absolutamente nada. El ex fiscal especial Jack Smith acaba de reaparecer públicamente por primera vez desde que Donald Trump tomó el control político del Departamento de Justicia. Y lo hizo con una finalidad: lanzar una crítica demoledora. Y no exagero, porque probablemente fue la primera vez que hemos visto a Jack Smith hablar abiertamente, sin filtros, frente a una audiencia internacional. Este evento fue en la Universidad de Londres, en la Facultad de Derecho, dentro del Centro Global de Constitucionalismo Democrático. Exactamente lo entrevistó el ex fiscal Andrew Weissmann, quien, hay que decirlo, hizo un gran trabajo. Pero lo interesante no fue solo lo que dijo Jack Smith, sino cómo lo dijo. Sin dudas, nos demostró, nos reveló todo lo que piensa sobre lo que Trump le hizo al Departamento de Justicia. Esta entrevista, amigos, es larguísima, duró como 2 horas. Me tomé el tiempo de verla completamente para poder resumir, creo que las partes más importantes, ¿no? Una conversación profunda, llamada literalmente El Estado de Estados Unidos. Una conversación con Jack Smith. En esta charla, pues, Jack Smith habló un poco de todo. Habló de los casos contra Donald Trump, habló de la decisión de la Corte Suprema que le otorgó esta inmunidad total a Trump, que fue lo que lo salvó de los procesos que Jack Smith llevaba. También habló sobre la opinión que tiene de esta persecución política contra de James Comey, Letitia James, etc. Y sobre todo lo que significa ser un fiscal ético, imparcial y comprometido con la ley. Sinceramente, señores, escuchar a Jack Smith fue como un recordatorio de cómo es que se supone que tiene que funcionar el sistema de justicia. Fue como ver ese pedacito de normalidad que Estados Unidos, al parecer, ha perdido. Pero bueno, vamos al punto clave. Uno de los momentos más fuertes fue cuando Andrew Weissmann le preguntó a Jack Smith qué es lo que opinaba sobre lo que Trump ha hecho con el Departamento de Justicia, y se refiere al tema de los despidos masivos, una purga, las represalias y la destrucción en sí institucional de esta agencia. Bueno, pues ese segmento está entre la hora y los 19 minutos de la entrevista y créanme, amigos, es imperdible. Así que primero quiero que escuchen eso.
Given what we have seen in the Department of Justice under the second Trump administration, and given your history as a state prosecutor, federal prosecutor, working under Republican and Democratic administrations, and your work at the ICC, what's your diagnosis of what is happening to the department? And similar to the question I had about what happens when the next president comes in and this sort of tit for tat concern. Are we also at the Department of Justice leading to a spiral where, let's assume we have a Democratic administration at some point, and what do they do then? Do they try and clean house? I mean, does it become a tit for tat where we essentially no longer have a civil service in the federal government, which is supposed to sort of eradicate this issue of why we only hire Democrats, we only hire Republicans? So how do you sort of see where we are and the prospect of what's going to happen?
You're right about the compound questions, by the way. That's definitely
yeah.
Let me break that down and take it in, I think, reverse order. Yes, I think the attacks on public servants, particularly nonpartisan public servants, I think it has a cost for our country that is incalculable. And I think that it's hard to communicate to folks how much that is going to cost us. If you think getting rid of the people who know most about national security is going to make our country safer, you do not know anything about national security. And that's happening throughout the department. It makes me concerned. And, this idea.
Luego, Jack Smith aborda la famosa decisión de la Corte Suprema, la que le dio a Trump la inmunidad total por sus actos oficiales. Quiero que escuchen cómo lo explica, porque lo hace sin dramatismo, pero con una claridad que deja en evidencia lo absurdo que es este fallo.
So, the first thing to talk about is just the decision generally. We argued for a different outcome, so obviously I was disappointed in the outcome. But I think a really important thing to understand here is, while I didn't agree, and I'll talk in a minute about the reasoning, I didn't agree with it, we followed it. There was never a question that we were going to follow the law as the Supreme Court said the law now was. And I think that's really important to understand, because I think once we get in a position where we start talking about maybe not following court opinions we don't like, we are lost in terms of the rule of law. And so the reasoning, I very much agreed with the reasoning in the dissent in that opinion more than the majority, but that was the law. In terms of that particular point, I would say two things. First, if you looked, and we have this if you're interested in it, it's in the final report that I wrote with my team, that how you can think about these issues is on a spectrum. If you look at how the district court, the appellate court, and then the Supreme Court thought about these things, and then the dissent and the majority in the Supreme Court, there were rule of law considerations, the things we're talking about tonight, and then there were also considerations of giving the executive enough latitude to act, and I think the word was boldly and fearlessly, that the executive would be able to lead the nation. The district court and the appellate court and the dissent strongly weighted the rule of law considerations. The majority opinion strongly weighted the other considerations, and to your point, brought up this scenario of, well, if you do this, then there's going to be this response. My view on that is a couple of things. One, I think if you do that, it's tantamount to saying you can never prosecute powerful high officials, because there could always be a concern that they'll stay in power and then come after people.
Luego, Jack Smith hace una reflexión muy interesante sobre los llamados juicios espectáculo, ¿no? Esos procesos judiciales que se usaban en las dictaduras para aparentar justicia mientras se perseguía a los opositores. Una comparación que, sinceramente, señores, yo creo que pone los pelos de punta a cualquiera al pensar en lo que estamos viendo en este segundo mandato de Donald Trump.
We were having this conversation on the day of the arraignment of the former FBI director, James Comey, in the Eastern District of Virginia with, many procedural irregularities. You also mentioned that in addition to process, you mentioned transparency as something else that you think about in differentiating sort of a righteous prosecution and transparency. Could you talk about sort of what you mean by that?
Sure. And again, like take the Navalny trial. Trials. We know that whenever he was going to offer a defense, they decided to not have those in public and not have the public access to it. Same thing, and I should be clear. A lot of times in a prosecution, if there's sensitive information or the protection of witnesses, you can't make everything public if you're going to also, say, protect witnesses or protect sensitive information. But the goal should be to make as much of it public as possible and make your reasons for doing things as public as possible. I think when people don't understand what the courts are doing and don't understand what prosecutors are doing, that's when distrust happens. I mean, another way I think of it is, if we want trust in our government institutions, it comes down to three things. And this is, I'll put it in the lens of a prosecutor, which is what I know. One, you have to be competent at what you do. You have to know how to do it. You have to have experience at it and talent at it. And you have to be someone who actually knows the rules of your profession. The second is you have to have integrity. You have to be a truth teller and someone who can be trusted to do things for the right reasons. But the third, and the third one's often the hardest, is you need to be able to communicate 1 and 2 to the public.
Más adelante, Jack Smith explica lo que para él significa ser un buen fiscal. Habla de ética, sobre la importancia de no ser político y sobre cómo su trabajo siempre ha sido servir a la justicia, sin importar quién sea el que esté en el poder de turno.
I was taught as a young prosecutor, no fear, no favor. I was taught as a young prosecutor, you do the right things, you do it the right way, and for the right reasons. And, when I was a young assistant district attorney in Manhattan, I thought that's what you were taught at the Manhattan DA's office. When I got to the Eastern District of New York, I was like, wow, that's the same philosophy here. We do it the same way. When I got to the ICC and what I tried to imbue on the people in my office when I was running the last office overseas was those same sort of principles. And what I found is that public servants who want to be good public servants, wherever they are, that those are really guiding principles. If you do those three things, do the right thing, do it the right way, and do it for the right reasons. If you're hitting those marks, you're going to be okay as a prosecutor.
Luego Jack Smith cuenta cómo es que fue entrenado, porque dijo que ha trabajado bajo administraciones ya sea tanto demócratas como republicanas, y que jamás se le había preguntado a nadie su afiliación política. Claro, no lo dice directamente, porque la comparación con lo que hoy hace Trump es más que evidente.
Maybe to be more pointed, given the environment that we're in the United States, how, if at all, does their political views or even their party affiliation factor in or not factor into your decision about who you would bring on?
Yeah. So most of the people who ended up working on this investigation from the beginning to the end when I was special counsel were people who were already actually working on the investigations when I took over. They were working on the separate cases. I did bring in a few people to assist. Those people I brought in were all longtime former federal prosecutors who had worked in both Republican and Democratic administrations over and over again. And one of the topics I really like to talk with folks about, because I don't think it's talked about enough, is the just incredible high level of integrity and competence and willingness to sacrifice of the people who do this work. And I'm talking about the people I worked with in the special counsel's office, but the Department of Justice in the U.S., the FBI, are filled with people like this. And these are people who are not self-promoters. They do not like to tell their own story. They cannot start a sentence with I. They start that with we. These are team players who don't want anything but to do good in the world. They're not interested in politics. And I get very concerned when I see how easy it is to demonize these people for political ends, when these are the very sort of people I think we should be celebrating. The people on my special counsel team were like that. The idea that politics played a role in who worked on that case or who got chosen is ludicrous. And Andrew, and this is another thing that I think if you're not inside the U.S. Department.
Luego viene un momento crucial y es que cuando explica por qué es que decidió presentar el caso de los documentos clasificados encontrados en Mar-a-Lago, en Florida. A pesar de saber que terminaría en manos de la jueza Aileen Cannon, recordemos, la jueza muy conocida por favorecer a Donald Trump.
Two things here. One is kind of I just wanted to address the note you said about, some people criticize things. I think one thing, and it kind of will explain a lot of my thinking about these things, the idea of people criticizing things, particularly in the media, if you are a good prosecutor, that is noise, and you need to tune it out. I think people in the media can do a very good public service in explaining what's going on in court and explaining legal concepts that are complex. But when we get to the point of people opining, you should have done this, you should have done that, good prosecutors learn to tune that out. I know whenever I've done a big case that no matter what I do, some people are going to think I'm a villain and some people are going to think I'm a hero. Some people are going to think I'm great and some people are going to think I stink. You tune that out. You just have to tune that out. And so whatever was going on in the media about that, I don't have any idea about that because it's not something I follow. In terms of the actual case, it was very important to me that we do all our work by the book. And that means the same way you do it in a DOJ case if it wasn't a case of this much public interest. And under that way of thinking, the place to venue this case was in Florida. There were arguments you could venue parts of it other places, certainly. And there are times that the DOJ has pieces of cases in different places. But the usual way is to have it in one place. And in this particular case, the documents were in Florida. The major acts of obstruction, the 2 series of obstruction that we charged in the case, happened in Florida. And I would also the last point I would just add is we didn't have the immunity decision that came later.
Y finalmente, Weissman repasa la trayectoria profesional de Jack Smith, ¿no? Yo creo que esto es muy importante porque nos muestra el contraste brutal entre los fiscales de carrera, los profesionales que han dedicado toda su vida a la ley, y bueno, los improvisados que Trump ha estado colocando. Muchos sin tener la experiencia real en procesos federales.
Jack was a graduate of Harvard Law School. He was a career prosecutor. And the unusual part, I think, of your background is that Jack was a prosecutor at the state level in the United States, at the federal level in the United States, and also internationally. I really can't think of anyone who has that confluence of experience. In addition, something that's sort of dear to my heart is you were also a prosecutor at sort of Main Justice, which is in Washington, so that's centrally, but also in the field, in various parts of the United States, not just in New York, but also in Tennessee, as we'll talk about. As I mentioned, Jack started his career as an assistant district attorney, that's the state level, in New York for the revered and legendary Robert Morgenthau. He then joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York. That is where I also started my prosecutorial career. And as both of us know, it's all downhill after that. In the Eastern District of New York is, I think, everybody who is a federal prosecutor will say the best job you've ever had. But you went on to many great things after that. You went to Main Justice, as I mentioned, where you were the head of the public integrity section that either handles or oversees all of the public corruption cases in the United States. You leaded that, and it should go without saying, but unfortunately, I need to say it. And it was the people who were prosecuted were based on the facts and the law, and it didn't matter if they were Republicans, Democrats, Independents, or no party at all, if they had committed a crime.
Bueno, señores, si quieren ver esta entrevista completa, se las voy a dejar en la descripción, el link del canal oficial que lo subió. Dura poco más de 1 hora y 20 minutos, pero lo que realmente me interesa que se lleven de este resumen es eso, ¿no? Jack Smith representa lo que el Departamento de Justicia debería de ser hoy, y lo que Trump destruyó al politizarlo por completo. Ahora bien, amigos, justamente ese tema de politizar es con lo que quiero continuar. Los principales medios de comunicación en Estados Unidos se han negado a firmar las nuevas normas de prensa impuestas por Pete Hegseth, el secretario de guerra designado por Trump. Traducción: una lucha directa por la libertad de prensa en el país. El contexto rápido. Básicamente lo que intentó hacer Pete Hegseth es imponer un conjunto de reglas que lo único que hacían era limitar que periodistas podían entrar al Pentágono. ¿Qué es lo que podían grabar? ¿Qué tipo de preguntas estaban permitidas? ¿Qué se podía investigar fuera del Pentágono? Pues, en otras palabras, a plena luz del día nos están diciendo que quieren controlar por completo la narrativa. Y bueno, como era de esperarse, los medios, tanto de izquierda, de centro y, ojo, hasta algunos conservadores, se unieron y le dijeron, esto va en contra de la primera enmienda. Veamos de qué se trata.
Joining us now is Charlie Sykes, MSNBC political analyst and author of the Substack newsletter To the Contrary. Ashley Parker, staff writer at The Atlantic and an MSNBC political analyst. Julie Roginski is a Democratic strategist and author of Salty Politics newsletter on Substack. It's great to have all of you here. Ashley, is the administration's choice for everyone, for every institution, every person, you're either with us or you're against us?
I don't know that they would quite put it like that, but yes, this is how President Trump has long seen the world, that either someone is an ally or a loyalist, one of his people, one of his justices on the Supreme Court, or his attorney general, or he views himself as a victim and casts himself and his supporters as victims who have grievances, who are subject to what he describes as witch hunts. And it is a very black and white, with us or against us worldview. That's absolutely correct.
Julia, it was striking to me when I saw the priests being denied the right to go in and give communion. So many top administration officials are Catholic. I think that's the predominant religion among top people in the administration. You've got Vance, Rubio, Bondi, Kennedy, Duffy, Stefanik, Levitt, border czar Tom Homan, and that's not even all of them. Do you wonder, are they okay with not allowing a priest to give communion?
Obviously. I mean, look, these are people who ostentatiously wear crosses at press briefings. These are people who invoke God and their religion all the time and sometimes try to foist it on the rest of us, but who don't follow the teachings of their own church. I mean, the Pope was very clear. This new American Pope was very clear about how we should treat the stranger, and especially obliquely talking about how the United States is treating refugees.
Well, he said pretty clearly that pro-life
means pro-life,
applied, yeah.
right? And look, I'm not Catholic, but I do spend a lot of time in church with my husband, who is, and I can tell you that that's not any teaching that I heard in all the times that I've gone with him. People need communion if they're Catholic, and the fact that you're denying them a basic right, the fact that we had in Grand Rapids, Michigan in June, a family sheltering in a church because they wanted sanctuary, and yet on the very first day in office, Donald Trump took away sanctuary status from places like churches. That's not Christian, and I don't say that as somebody who is Christian, but I say that because I'm not, but I say that as somebody who knows enough about religion to understand that if you only read scriptures, whether the Old Testament or the New Testament, this does not apply. This is probably the biggest violation you can think of. And yet these people will stand up there tomorrow and say they're representing their religion. They'll wear their ostentatious crosses, and it'll make the rest of us feel like we're heathens or we're somehow anti-Christian or we're anti-religious. They're the ones who are a disgrace to this religion, not the rest of us.
Charlie, there's another part of this story. NBC Chicago obtained video of a Catholic priest warning churchgoers at Mass to be careful when they leave because federal agents are outside waiting. So neighbors told the station they formed a human chain, basically a pathway to guide parishioners safely home. Listen.
I felt really badly for them. I mean, they were inside, scared to come out.
I'm responding to my neighbors feeling terrified to just go to church.
I mean, regardless of your faith, is there any city in America where people aren't going to draw the line at what they see as mistreatment of their neighbors, Charlie?
Ok, señores, esto es muy importante. Acabamos de ver algo que demuestra que todavía existe un límite, incluso en esta era de Trump y de su círculo, que están intentando manipular absolutamente todo lo que sale en los medios. Seamos honestos, lo que Pete Hegseth intentó hacer no es un simple ajuste de reglas, es un intento descarado de censura. Bajo la excusa de querer proteger información sensible, quieren decidir quién tiene acceso a la verdad y quién no. Fíjense bien cómo funciona este patrón. Cada vez que los medios critican a Trump, la reacción es la misma. Salen a desacreditar, a castigar y a controlar. Lo hizo con CNN, lo hizo con el New York Times y ahora intenta lo mismo pero desde el propio Pentágono. Este es el reflejo de esa mentalidad de o estás conmigo o estás contra mí, lo que tanto se mencionó durante la campaña de Trump. Y es justamente, ¿no? Esa es la mentalidad la que destruye a la base de cualquier sociedad libre. Algunos defensores del trumpismo argumentan que los medios necesitan el control, que necesitan un control, que hay que controlar a los medios, que muchos periodistas inventan cosas, que atacan injustamente al gobierno, etc. Pero a ver, yo creo que hay una diferencia enorme entre fiscalizar el trabajo periodístico o imponer reglas desde el propio poder político, solo para decidir qué se puede decir y qué no. Eso ya es censura. Ahora bien, lo más irónico es que esta administración se autoproclama, ¿no? Durante meses vinimos escuchando lo mismo. Los defensores de la libertad y de la Constitución. Y ellos son los primeros en pisotear los derechos más fundamentales de Estados Unidos. Claro, cuando les conviene. Al final, esta historia no se trata del tema de los medios contra el Pentágono o algo así. Se trata del futuro de la información en Estados Unidos. Porque si el gobierno logra controlar todo lo que se publica, lo siguiente será controlar lo que pensamos. Así que, por una parte, no se celebra que los medios se hayan plantado. Yo creo que este es el tipo de resistencia que puede llegar a mantener un poco viva la democracia por el futuro. Pero bueno, ¿qué piensan ustedes? ¿Creen que los medios hacen bien en resistirse a las reglas del Pentágono? ¿O piensan que debería de haber algún tipo de regulación sobre lo que se publica en temas militares o bueno, en general, ¿no? Temas del propio gobierno de turno? Los leo en los comentarios. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme en este video. Recuerden, como siempre, déjame tu like, comparte el contenido y suscríbete a nuestro canal. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.